Hi, this is Edward Troxel. In this tutorial we're going to finish up this series on finding and removing silent areas from the track. But we're going to look at some details that we haven't looked at yet. So far we've only had one audio track, so let's see what happens if our timeline looks a little different. Here we have a different timeline. We have the same tracks we had before with this is our audio track that we have been removing from. Here I've added a couple of more audio clips that we also want to remove the silent areas. And then here we have an audio clip that would be sort of like a background clip that we really don't want to touch at all. But the problem is, if we just render everything, then we're going to get this track plus this track plus this track all rendered into the same file, when instead we need to process this track, then we need to process this track, and then we need to basically not process this track. So the problem is, how do we get only the one track? Well, obviously we could say solo the track, or we could mute the other two tracks. And so let's just have the script mute the other two tracks, and we'll see how that could work. So here's our main routine that we've been using. We've created our two temp files, and then we're going to add a for each loop here. So for each track, my track in vegas.project.tracks, if it's an audio track, because we're only concerned about the audio tracks if you remember, let's set the mute of that track to true, and let's set the solo to false. So we're basically turning off every audio track. Then as we go through each track to process each track, first thing I want to do is add this and say if it is an audio track and the track is selected. If the track is not selected, then I don't want to process that track. Then I'm going to change my mute to false so that that is the track we are looking at. Then after we get done processing the file, now we're going to finally turn on these file deletes. So we're going to delete the temp file and we're going to delete the temp log. Finally, when we're finished, we're going to mute that track again. Then when we're done, we're going to go through this for each loop. We're going to go through all of the tracks again. If it's an audio track, then I'm going to set mute to false. The first thing I'm going to have to do is now tell it that it's this track and this track that I want to process. So I can just click and then control click on the other one, and now both of those are selected, or I can select them however I need to select them. Then now that they are selected, I can run the script. So notice it is muted and is only processing that first track. Now it has muted the other track and it's processing the second audio track, and then it is finished. And so you can see we have our before look like this, and now our after looks like this. So it processed those two tracks correctly. But we still have an issue. Let's say that initially we had this track down here was muted because we just wanted to get the sound out of the way, and then for some reason we had this track soloed, but we wanted to go ahead and process these two tracks. So I select them again. Now if I run the script, it did properly process it, but notice I no longer have a soloed track and I no longer have a muted track. So let me undo this again. And you can see this one was muted and this one was soloed, but after running the script they no longer was. So I really need to save the state of that information. So let's go back and look at our script again. To save the state of the information, in this case I'm just going to set up an array. I've set up a limit of 1,000 tracks, and then my second one, the comma 2, I've set in there so I could save both mute and solo. So I need to save two pieces of information. Both of them are Boolean, and I'm allowed up to 1,000 tracks in this. So if you had more than 1,000 tracks, of course you'd have to increase that number. Booleans are really small, so that's really not going to take up much space. But I need to change this section here, and so I'm going to change this to another routine that is called Save Track Status. And then down here, I'm going to do the same thing and change this to a routine called Recall Track Status. So now we need to just look and see what Save Track Status and Recall Track Status do. Here is our Save Track Status routine. First thing I'm going to do is go through every track in the project tracks. If the track is audio, then I'm going to get the index number from mytrack.index, and then in this array I'm going to take the track status, myIndex, 0 equals the mute status. Track status myIndex, 1 is equal to the solo status. Then I'm going to set the mute equal true and the solo equals false, just like I did before. Now to recall the status, I'm just going to go through all my tracks again. If it's an audio track, then I get my index number just the same as I did up here. And now I'm basically going to do this backwards. My mute status now equals track status myIndex, 0, and my solo status equals track index myIndex, 1. So with this change in place, let's see what happens when we run this script. So remember, the bottom one is muted, the second one is soloed. So it has run, it has processed track 3 correctly, it has processed track 4 correctly, and track 4 still has the solo status set, and track 5 still has the mute status set after it was run, instead of us just clearing those out. So this will end this series at this point. What we've been able to do is we've saved the status of each track's mute and solo. Then we've gone through and processed each track individually now. Then we delete the log files as they are no longer needed after we have processed that track. Then once all the tracks have been processed, we go ahead and reset the track status back to the status they were originally. So we haven't made any status changes. I hope you have found this series interesting. If you would like to see any additions to this script, let me know how you would like to see this changed. And let me know if you have any questions about this and what types of things would you like to see in the future. And did we do this how you thought we would? Or do you think there was be a better way to handle this? Let me know your thoughts. I hope you subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial. Please sign up at www.jettv.com and subscribe on YouTube to get further notifications on when new videos are presented.